Alright, so hi guys, my name is Dipender and this is Desi Codes. So today I'm back with another tutorial and this one is going to be pretty fun. So in today's tutorial, we will be looking into modals, how to efficiently work with them. Now, modals, they play a very integral part in any mid to large size of application, and the list of different use cases is kind of huge. Now you can use them to display information or to throw some sort of disclaimer confirmation box, or maybe you just want to show a completely separate UI like within the modal as the login sign up kind of thing, which is pretty common in web applications. So it's no secret that they are very essential in any application nowadays. However, there are certain challenges which come along the way when we kind of introduce modals in our application. Now, there are a few challenges which I have listed right over here, which is the first one is that as application grows, the list of modals grow as well, and it kind of becomes a bit tricky to work with them. So now think of having dozens of different modals in your application, so it does become a bit challenging to kind of organize the entire thing in a proper way, to have a well organized system. So that's one challenge. The other one is reusing or opening modals from different part of an application. So think of it in such a way that assume that there is a modal for uploading file, something like this, and this feature of the application is something which is used in multiple places. In some place you want to upload a file, the other one you might want to upload an image. You do get the point. So you may want to reuse the same modal. However, you want to pass some sort of configuration while opening that modal, and the modal kind of takes care of it. In short, you want to reuse the same modal from different parts. So that's one thing that we face while working with different modals. And lastly, passing of data, which is kind of correlated with the previous point, and it's like kind of passing some sort of data while opening a modal. So that's that. It's kind of like a brief of what this tutorial is. So in this tutorial, we will be building up a system, an organized system, which will help us work with different modals more efficiently. So let's get started. Now, before jumping onto the coding part, it is very much important for us to be on the same page. As in, you and I, we have to understand what direction we will be going in. So for that, over here, I'm going to demonstrate the overall idea of this tutorial, as in how the system will look like. So over here, we have an application which has multiple screens. And at the same time, we have multiple different modals as well. Let me just kind of create it real quick. Assuming that this is kind of like a space, this is kind of a list of all the different modals. There could be one for upload modal, then we may have like confirmation modal, I think display modal, something like that. You do get the point. So think of it in this way, that we want to build up a system which allows the user to open any of the modals that we have from any of the screens, right? And the entire thing should be so well structured that while opening any of these modals, the component in itself, the one which wants to open the modal, it doesn't really care about how the system is set up. It just has the tools available to it, and it just uses that tool to kind of open the respective modal. So for this, we will be using context. We're going to use React context to make this thing happen, to build up this system. So the idea is that we will be wrapping the entire application, the part which should have the feature of opening modal, within a modal provider. Now this is something, it's a context obviously, which we will be building from scratch. So it's going to be something like this. We're going to have a provider which will be wrapping the entire application and is going to share the context within that scope. So that's that. Now any of the screen, let me just place it over here, assuming that there is a screen called screen 3. Now any of the screen, if they want to open a modal, assuming that there is a button on that screen saying login, and when the user clicks on it, we will be calling a function called open modal. And that function is going to expect a string value as the first argument, and the value of it is going to be the name of the modal. So for instance, it's going to be something like this. And eventually we will also work on the other part, which is passing of data, as in they can kind of pass in some sort of props per se to that specific modal, and it's going to be something like this. So that's kind of like the idea of the system which we are aiming to build. So keeping that in mind, let's jump right into the code. And lastly, there's one other thing, that for this tutorial I will be using MUI library and the dialog component specifically. But again, this tutorial is not restricted to just this UI library. You can use any of the libraries which are out there. It could be Tailwind CSS or Chakra UI. Like, there are hundreds of different UI libraries out there nowadays, so you can go with anyone. So the thing is, the structure, the idea remains the same. It's just that the implementation might differ. So that being said, by the way, we are going to use the dialog component, this particular one. Now that being said, let's jump right into the code and hope you are as excited as I am. So let's go. All right, so let's get started. So now that we have a very basic idea of what needs to be done, let's jump right into the code part. So over here, I have a React application set up and I'm using codesandbox.io. Now, if you want to follow the same tutorial like side by side, you can do the same, or you can set it up locally on your system. So over here, we have a React application and I've installed a couple of different packages. Over here, we have 3 different packages, the ones which are listed on the MUI library homepage, these 3 right over here. Then I've also installed the React Router DOM package in order to implement the routing system in our application. So over here in the app component, we are importing the browser router, routes, and the route component. We got the browser router wrapping the entire thing, then we have the routes, and then we have a single route component which is rendering this particular component on the root. So home is actually a component, it's working like it's being used as a route. The home component, let's test it out. Let's actually see the home component, which is right over here. So within this component, again, the layout is pretty simple. We are importing 3 different things from the MUI library, and we got the stack. Now, in case you don't know what it is, it's just a component which allows you to stack elements, whether vertically or horizontally. The default is vertical. Then we got the typography, which is a component used to display textual content, and there it is, the home. And in the end, we got the button, which is right over here. So we have a very basic structure already set up, and now let's actually jump onto the main part, which is the concern of this tutorial. So firstly, we need to create the context. So for that, over here we have a context directory within the source, and within this directory we got the modal context, which is currently empty. So let's work on this thing. So firstly, we need to import a few things from the React library. We need the create context. We also need the use state and use context. So let's create the context, and I'm going to name it as modal context, calling in the create context in such a way, and there it is. So now we also need to have the context provider, which will be wrapping the entire application and giving access to the values, which will be wrapping the entire application, and any of the children within the scope will be able to consume the context. So over here, let's name it as modal provider, destructuring the children, returning the modal context dot provider with the children being wrapped inside of it in such a way. Now let's actually work on the state. So for that, over here, let's create a state using the use state hook, and I'm going to name it as modal. So this state which we are creating right now, it will be denoting the currently opened modal. So by default, as we don't want to show any modal right away, the value of it will be null, which means that if the value is null, it means that no modal is open at the moment. So that's the first thing that we have to do, is to have a state for the currently active modal. And let's also create a function to update this state, or to say in a better way, to a function which will allow us to open a modal. Again, it's going to make more sense as we move forward. So the name of the function, open modal, and it's going to expect a single argument, which would be the name of the modal in plain string. So right over here, we will be just calling the set modal and passing down the name in such a way. Now you must be thinking that why even bother to create a function for this when the set modal in itself does the same thing. So the thing is that eventually we will also be passing down some sort of data. We may want to pass down some data to that modal. So we will be adding another argument alongside with the name, but I like approaching things a step at a time. So let's just keep it simple and just place a single argument for the time being. So now that we have the modal and the function to update the state, or to say in a better way, to open a modal, let's pass it down as the value. So over here, it's going to be an object which will be having the modal and the open modal function. So now let's head back to the app component, and we will be wrapping the entire thing within the modal provider in such a way. So now that the entire app is wrapped inside of it, let's get to the home page, the home component, and we can consume the context right over here. So in order to consume the context in a functional component, one of the ways is to use the use context and use context and passing down the context which we want to consume. However, doing that over and over again from different parts of your application, like calling the use context and passing down the modal context over and over again, is a bit tedious. And in order to smoothen the entire thing, let's create a custom hook. And the name of the hook would be use modal, and we can just kind of derive the value right from that hook. So in the modal context file, let's create the hook and let's name it as use modal. And it's going to be a function where we just use the use context and pass down the modal context in such a way, which also means that we don't have to directly export the modal context anymore, as we can just make use of this hook right away. So now within the home component, we can call the use modal, and it's going to give us the two things which we are passing down as value, the modal and the open modal function. So let's get these two, and in order to check whether we are successfully able to get the values, let's log them to the console, and there it is. Beautiful. So before I end this part, let's just quickly call this function with some value just to see whether we are able to update the state. So for that, on the button component that we have, let's pass down the on click. Let's keep it simple by passing an inline callback, open modal, and this is actually gonna be the name of the modal in string value. So it's gonna be upload modal in such a way. So now if I click on this button, it's gonna call this function with this value, and as the way that we have it set it up, it's gonna update the state. Let's see. And there it is. Sweet. So now that we are able to update the state, in the next part we will be working on the upload modal. Obviously we need to have at least a single modal to make things work, and also we will be building a special component which will make sure that based on this state, the respective modal is displayed, which is the most interesting part of this tutorial. So let's do that in the next one. Alright, so let's continue, and now we need to create a modal. We're gonna give it the name of upload modal. So for this tutorial we will be just building a single one, but the implementation remains the same no matter how many modals you have in your project. So over here within the components directory, I like to keep all the modals in a single place so that it's easier to work with. So over here within the components directory, let's create a new folder by the name of Modals, and within this we can place all the different modals. Now in case you're working on a big project like an enterprise level application, then in that case you can create subdirectories based on different features or maybe different screens, like modals residing in different screens. So for this one, let's just keep it simple and let's create a modal right within this directory. So I'm going to give it a name of upload modal.jsx, the component. And in here, we need to import a few things from the MUI library. So firstly, we need the dialog component. As I stated earlier, this is the component which we are going to use. Then the stack, typography, and I think that would be enough. We don't really have to spend time on kind of building up the UI. It doesn't really matter. That's not the concern. So let's create the modal, the component, and over here we will be using the dialog component, which will be wrapping the entire thing. So the content of the modal will go right over here. So within this, let's just place in a stack component, and like we can just place in a typography with a text of upload file, something like this. And later I will also show you how we can kind of use dynamic data, the data which was passed into this modal at the time of opening it. So let's just export default the upload modal right away. So the dialog component, it is pretty simple. In order for it to be visible, we have to pass in. Now this is a required prop for the MUI library. And again, this particular tutorial, it is focused on, like as I said earlier, it is focused on using the MUI library, the dialog component specifically. But then again, if you're using any other library like Tailwind, CSS, Bootstrap, the implementation remains the same. It's just that you have to make sure that if the component, the modal component, is placed in the components tree structure, that modal is visible. So what do I mean by that? So for example, this component that we have, the upload modal, if we get back to the app component, and if I just place it somewhere over here, making sure that we import it. So see what's going to happen. As soon as we place it, the modal will be visible right away. And there it is, as you can see. So let's actually fix a little bit of the UI. So we can just pass in the full width prop, and on the stack component, let's set a padding of 3 on all the sides, which is going to be 8 into 3, 24 pixels. And that's looking much better. Again, we don't have to spend time kind of building up the UI. It doesn't really matter. So that's that. As you can see that as soon as we added this component in the component tree structure, like within the available scope, the component is visible right away. So make sure that the component, the modal component, is structured in a way that as soon as it is added, it is visible. So it means that we are permanently going to set the open value to be of true. So this is a Boolean value, and if we just pass it in such a way, it implicitly, like this is implied that the value is true. So there it is. Now the thing is, we need to have a component which will ensure that based on the current modal state, the one that we have in the context, the respective component is visible, because we don't want a list of different modals like listed right over here. We don't want that. We only want to render a single component, and actually it's going to make sense if I place it right over here. So we're going to have a modal manager component, and this component will make sure that the right modal is opened. The right modal is being added to the component tree structure based on the modal state which is within our context. So now heading back in the components modal directory, let's create this component. Let's name it as modal manager.jsx. So this component, it's going to consume the same context. So firstly, let's create the component modal manager, and let's export default the modal manager. Now this one is actually, it's very interesting. So in here we will be calling the use modal hook, and it's going to give us the modal and the open modal. But for this case, we just care about the modal, like the current state of the modal. So now what we can do is that, let me actually log the modal over here for the time being, and let's remove it. Let's remove the upload modal in the app component. We don't want to place the modals directly, and we will be just placing the modal manager in such a way. Now, just a side note, in case you're using the MUI library, there is a component by the name of modal manager. So make sure to import the right component. This is a common mistake, and you have to import the one that we just created, the custom component that we just created. And as you can see, as we are returning back null, there is nothing being displayed at the moment. So now if I click on upload avatar, this button, which is within the home screen, the home component, it's going to update the state, and we don't even need this console log in this file. So as soon as I click on this thing, it updates the state, and there it is, the upload modal state, which is coming from the modal manager. So now what we have to do is we have to configure, we have to organize it in a way that it returns the respective modal based on the state. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to have a lookup table. We're going to have a lookup modals, or maybe modal lookup, something like this. And this thing is going to be an object. And within this modal manager file, we're going to import all the different modals that we have in our application, in our project. So right over here, we're going to have something like this. So modal lookup is an object, and it has all the different modals. The key is the name of the modal, and the value is the component. This is the modal component that we created earlier. So now what we are going to do is that we're going to check that if the modal state is null. So if there is no modal being opened, if no modal is open at the moment, then as you know, the state value is null, as that's how we have configured it, as you can see. So if we check that if no modal is opened, so this is going to be null, and we are kind of we have added the logical operator right over here. So this would be true. In that case, we don't want to show anything. We just want to return null as it is. However, if there is something, if there is some state to the modal, then checking against the modal lookup table, the object that we have, we're going to display the right component. So for that, let's create a modal component using the modal lookup that we have in here, and using the square brackets so that we can dynamically pass in the value. So this is going to be the new state, and as you can see that everything falls in place. We are passing upload modal, that's going to be the new state, and based upon how we have configured it, it's going to return us back the respective component. So this modal is the one that we have to return back in such a way, and there it is. So that's perfect. So if I'm gonna refresh, let's test it out. By default, it's null, so it is not gonna show anything. It's gonna return null. But as soon as we click on this button, it updates the state, and based on how we have this thing configured, it's gonna return back the right modal. So that is beautiful. So now let's work on closing of modal, like how we can close a modal. So for that, within the modal context, we're going to have another function, and this function is going to be close modal, and it's just going to set the modal state to be back of null in such a way, and making sure that we pass it down as well in such a way to the context value. It means that when we call the use modal, we can also get the close modal function that we created in the context. And in the modal manager, we have this thing, we have this function. So we can pass it down to whatever modal which is opened. So over here, we can pass it down as on close and set the value of it to be in such a way. So the thing is that all the modals that we're going to have in our application, regardless what modal is opened, they will be getting an on close prop. So within the upload modal component, we can expect that it's going to get the on close prop, and we can use it right over here. So the MUI library, the dialog component specifically, it takes in a prop of on close, and this, it takes a function, and this function will be called whenever the user clicks anywhere outside the dialog component. So if we save it, and if I click on this upload avatar, see what's going to happen. The modal is opened, but if we click anywhere outside the dialog component, it's going to call this function, the on close, which is being passed down from the modal manager. As you can see, this thing is dynamic. It's getting passed down in over here, which we are actually deriving from the context after consuming the context, and it just closes the modal because it sets the state back to be of null right over here. So that is perfect. Now the last part would be passing down of data. So we are aiming to have something like, let's get to the home component, that the user can also pass down some sort of data as the second argument of the open modal function that we have. So for instance, we can have something like this in such a way, and we can have we have the access to it within the modal which we are opening. So for this, what we're going to do is firstly getting to the open modal function that we have in our context right over here. We're going to be expecting a props thing. So there could be a chance that a user may just want to open a modal and not pass in some data. So we can just set a default value of it to be an empty object in such a way. And now we will be changing the structure a little bit. So the thing is that instead of setting the value of the modal as a string value, like as how we have it at the moment, instead of having the string value, it's going to be an object which will be having the name property. The name property means the name of the modal, and the other property is going to be props in such a way. So now if we save it, we're going to see some error because we have changed the structure. And in the modal manager, if we refresh, get to the modal manager, we're going to see that when we open a modal, we will see an error, as you can see, because right now we are checking it against an object. So that's the thing. So now that we have changed this thing to be an object, we have to look up against the modal.name, the way that we have structured it now. So it's going to be modal.name. And now if we save it, and if I click on the upload avatar, it is working back again. So that is perfect. But we are still we still need to pass down the props. So for that, right over here on the modal component, the dynamic modal component that we have, we can spread out the props from modal.props in such a way, which means that again, regardless what modal is being opened, they get the props. So it also means that we have to set the default value of it in such a way to be an object. Otherwise, if we try to spread an undefined value, then it might throw an error. So now if we save it, let's get to the upload modal, and we can expect that it will receive a prop called title, which we are passing down right over here. As you can see from the home screen when we are calling the open modal. So over here we can use this title in such a way, and there it is. So that is perfect. So as you can see that we have built up a system which allows us to smoothly interact and work with modals. And although it took us some time, but in the long run, it does pay off. Now lastly, there's one other thing which I want to cover, which is passing of functions like callbacks. So for that, in the home screen, the home component that we got over here, let's create a function which is going to be something like upload file. We won't waste time kind of adding functionality or request for uploading a file, but assume that this is a function which kind of expects a file that the user selected, and then it just kind of make some request to some endpoint, stuff like that, kind of make a post request trying to upload that file. So in the end, we can just kind of say that file uploaded. The point is that we have to pass down this function to the respective modal, and we can do that in such a way. Upload file function that we have. So in the upload modal component, we can expect that it's going to get the upload file function, and we can bind it with any sort of button or something within this component. So let's import the button first, and it's going to be upload, and the on click is going to be the upload file function which we are expecting to receive as props. So now let's click over here, and now if we click on upload, there it is. We are able to call that callback function which we passed down while opening the Moodle. So this essentially covers like all the different challenges, all the different stuff that we talked about earlier, and it is amazing kind of having everything set up in such a way. So I think that would be it for this tutorial. I hope it was helpful and you learned something new. And if you would like to see more of such tutorials, I would love to create. Let me know what you want for the upcoming tutorials or series. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and press that bell icon and stuff. And yeah, keep supporting, keep learning. Thank you.